Hey Banks Class, time for another story. Okay, this one's called The Sly Squirrel Gets a Shock. Sly the Squirrel was a mean creature. He always got the very best nuts just for himself. He wouldn't let the nuthatch have a single one of the nuts in the hazelwood where he lived, and if he caught the little dormouse taking one off the ground, he would bound down and chatter at him angrily. "They're my nuts, they're my nuts." "They're not," said the dormouse. "You ask the hazel trees. They grow them for everybody." The squirrel is a meanie, said the nuthatch, and whistled loud and long. Sly is his name, and sly is his nature, sang a little blue tit, who sometimes liked a nut himself. "Nobody likes the squirrel, nobody likes the squirrel," squeaked the field mouse, popping his head up from the hole under the roots of the pine tree, not far off. The squirrel stared round angrily. It wasn't nice to have things like that shouted out about him. He was very annoyed. He bounded away to the top of the tree. It was late autumn, and there were many nuts hanging on the boughs. The squirrel picked one and bit it with his sharp teeth. He gnawed a hole in the nut to get the sweet kernel from it. But the kernel inside was not sweet at all. It was very bitter, and the squirrel spat it out in disgust. "A bad nut," he said. "There are such a lot this year. I wish the nuthatch and the mice would all get the bad nuts, and I could have all the good ones. That would serve them right for being so mean to me." As he sat and nibbled at the good nut, an idea came into his head. "I know what I'll do. I'll gather all of the bad nuts that I can find, and I'll put them all in one big pile, and I'll tell the nuthatch and the mice that I've picked a present for them. Then they'll be sorry they called me rude names, and I will think I'm a fine fellow. But what a shock they will get when in the middle of the winter, when they go to their store of nuts and find that all the nuts are bad." The mean little squirrel began to hunt for the bad nuts. He knew that they had little holes in them where the nut grub had bitten its way down. He put them all together in a pile at the foot of one of the hazel trees. "Look at the sly squirrel. He is piling up heaps of nuts for himself," said the nuthatch to the dormouse below. The squirrel overheard them. "Those lovely nuts are not for myself," he said. "They are for you, and for the dormouse, and for the field mouse." "I don't want them," said the dormouse. "I sleep all winter through. I'm eating my nuts. I'm eating nuts myself now to get my body fat so that I will sleep in comfort all the winter long. It will soon be very cold, and I want to sleep." The nuthatch was surprised to hear that the sly squirrel had collected the nuts for others and not for himself. "Why, thank you," he said. "I may visit this pile in the winter. I've plenty stored up for myself," said the field mouse, "but maybe I'll find a few of your nuts useful." "Sly, thank you very much." Oh, so you see, the mice are being very thankful, and actually the squirrel's being very sly. So he and the nuthatch covered up the big pile of bad nuts with leaves. Sly the squirrel grinned to himself. "What a shock they will get," he said. Now that night the frost came. It came very suddenly indeed, before Sly the squirrel expected it. He'd been so busy collecting nuts for the others that he had no time to collect good ones for himself. Usually he picked many nuts, and he hid them in corners and crannies, so that when he woke up on warm days in the winter and he felt hungry, he would have plenty of nuts to go and find and eat. It was terribly cold, and the next day Sly woke up and looked out from his hole in his tree. "I'd better go out and find some nuts to store away," he said sleepily. He put his nose out for a bit further, but the frost bit it, and he drew it back very quickly. Oh, it's so cold outside. I think I'll sleep for a bit longer." He slept for more than a month. When he did wake, he was dreadfully hungry. He leapt out of his hole into the winter sunshine. It was quite a warm day for winter time. He looked about for nuts. The trees were quite bare. There were no leaves and there were no nuts. And then Sly remembered that he had not had time to store any away, not any good nuts at all. "Oh my, I didn't put any nuts for myself as I usually do," he said to himself. "Now what shall I do?" He sat hugging his little empty tummy, and then he saw the nuthatch flying by, whistling. "Hi, nuthatch, where are there any nuts?" "Nowhere," said the bird. "The trees are bare." Then Sly saw the little mouse. "Hi, field mouse," he called. "Have you any nuts stored up? Could you spare a few for me?" "No, I've only enough for myself and my family," said the field mouse. "But have you forgotten that lovely pile over there, under the dead leaves?" Sly had forgotten all about the pile. "Where are they?" he said eagerly. "You can have them all," said the mouse. "They are just over there." So Sly bounded across over to the pile, brushed aside the leaves and cracked the nuts hungrily. But alas, for the poor squirrel, every nut was bad. Every single last one of them. The little field mouse ran up and the nuthatch flew down. "What's the matter? What's the matter, Sly?" they said, as they saw Sly throwing away one nut after another. "Bad, bad, that one's bad, that one's bad. They're all bad," said Sly. "Why did you collect all bad nuts, you silly, stupid thing?" The nuthatch whistled and the field mouse squealed with laughter. "Silly yourself. It was you who collected that pile of nuts and gave them to us. Don't you remember?" And then at last, Sly did remember. Yes, he had picked up all the bad nuts with holes in to give to the nuthatch and the field mouse. And then he was filled with horror and shock. The nuthatch and the field mouse went off laughing. "Serves you right," they cried. So Sly the Squirrel had to go hungry all of that winter. And if the little field mouse hadn't have been kind and given him a few of his own nuts, he would have starved. I don't think he'll play a trick like that again. Do you? So, our friend Sly was a sly little squirrel, not a very nice little squirrel. I've got some squirrels in my garden and they seem like cheeky little squirrels. I don't think they're sly squirrels. It's a bit of a sad story really, but so nice that the mice, the dormouse was it? The field mouse, he was a kind character, giving squirrels some nuts. Now our next story, again, is about another living thing. It's called Lightwing the Swallow. So our squirrel story, a squirrel is a mammal. We know it's a mammal because it's covered in hair and it will have babies, it doesn't lay eggs. It will feed its babies with its own milk that it will produce. Now, a swallow is not a mammal. A swallow is a type of bird, but it's still a living thing. It still breathes, it still grows, it still moves. So, our next story will still be about a living thing, but it will be about a bird. See you soon.